So we come back to zero emission zones. So urban scope, and yes, you already know basically what is the concept. So it's the implementation of harmonized zero emission zones. So it's not only implementing but also harmonizing the concept, where in all major cities in the Eurodelta, so with more than 100,000 inhabitants, and this will be for all types of road vehicles, so passenger cars, light and heavy duty vehicles, and the target is 2035. This map shows the cities that have been identified with more than 100,000 inhabitants. So there are about 50 cities in the study zone in the Eurodelta, and to give you an idea of the total population of these cities is around 25 million inhabitants. And also we have considered people traveling to and from these zones, so mainly to these zones, so it's even more people involved in this study. The rationale for defining this policy measure, and specifically, as I said, harmonization of the zero emission zones would provide a level playing field. First, would also enable make easier on the cross-border transport if you travel from one zero emission zone to another. Of course, if the rules are the same or similar, it's much better and more interoperability. 2035 is probably a realistic time horizon to align the different existing and planned low emission and then zero emission zones. So we think that it's possible, it's realistic, and it is in line with some projects that are ongoing. We have tried to find some information about the behavioral responses in different studies that we have analyzed. And what we have seen is that the main impact of the introduction of zero emission zones is basically motor shifts, which means people switching from a thermic vehicle to an electric vehicle or hydrogen-powered vehicle. On the volume of travel, according to the studies that we have analyzed, there is a little effect on the volume, so little effect on the vehicle kilometers performed, and also limited impact on model shift. But this is specifically for if the zero emission zone is considered. Of course, in many cities, there are other policies that tend to promote modal shift from individual personal cars to public transport, to other modes. Of course, this is not part of this study, so it's specifically regarding the zero emission zone. And last point, it's a macroscopic approach. So we have considered possibilities of introducing zero emission zones in all the cities that I've mentioned previously. Some projects are already ongoing, others will come sooner, others a bit later, but from macroscopic approach, we can take anyway some conclusions and some impacts. How did we evaluate the impacts? We started from the baseline scenario that has been presented by Stephanie previously. So this is the reference for the comparison. And as you have noticed, the baseline scenario already includes some decrease in the environmental emissions. So it means that the comparison will be with a rather realistic baseline scenario, except the aspect of the external trends that are not compared. But the most important is to have a reference for comparing the scenario, this one, and also the aviation shift to high-speed train has been compared with the reference of the baseline scenario. We have used the example of Brussels Capital Region, which today has a low emission zone and will progressively evolve towards a zero emission zone with progressive ban of vehicles according to their Euro category. So we would like to extend. We have taken the characteristics of the Brussels region, low emission zone and zero emission zone, extended to the shore areas with Eurodelta. But we have also considered a full thermic ban in 2035, so including personal cars and light goods and heavy goods vehicles and coaches, which were not considered in Brussels. So that we have a complete ban of thermic cars in 2035, which is also in accordance with some other low emission zones, for example, which currently focus rather on trucks and heavy duty vehicles. So we have to be as consistent as possible regarding the type of vehicles and the bans. The impacts in terms of emissions avoided. Here are the figures that we have estimated in comparison with the baseline scenario. So a huge reduction in the CO2 emissions, minus 55%, and this is cumulative, so it's over the whole period from today to 2050. Also NOx, huge reduction, minus 37%, and PM10, minus 54% reduction, cumulative. If we compare to the ambition of the Green Deal, but in this time for the year 2030, the CO2 emissions reductions corresponds to approximately 3% of the overall ambitions of the Green Deal. So it's a huge impact, but it is understandable if you consider the population that is concerned and the number of vehicles and number of vehicle kilometers that are performed every day, every year. We have considered the possibilities of implementation and therefore the possible area for harmonization. The harmonization would enable to make choices at local level, at city level, with consistent and comparable basis, so with similar criteria, which would, of course, be beneficial for the users, for the local authorities, and for the companies and all the stakeholders that are involved in this area. So harmonization of the criteria, so simplification of travel between two zero emission zones, harmonization or at least consistency in the information provided to the users regarding the status and the progressive implementation of the zero emission zones. Also, it would be beneficial to have harmonization of the identification of the vehicles and according to the eligibility, be it stickers or a database of vehicles and number plates. Also, if possible, harmonization of the procedure to obtain permits, application for exceptions, etc. So these are the main criteria that would be beneficial for harmonization. Regarding accompanying measures, so in this case, it is rather let's say the usual accompanying measures that are required for the implementation of the emission zones. So first and quickly, well-defined geographical scope. It means that if you have a clear definition, it's easy to recognize, it's easy to understand. So existing boundaries, for example, is probably the best way to define the geographical scope of a zero emission zone. And possibly consider if two towns are very close, possibility to have a single zone into cities that are not so far from each other. Predictability and progressivity is for the implementation period. So clear announcements should be made about the planning of implementation, the evolution of rules, so that access is clearly mentioned and understandable, and this should be communicated efficiently. It will also, of course, promote social acceptability. Provision of alternatives, of course, there should be alternatives, other possibilities of travel. This is for residents, this is for businesses, this is for travelers. They should have affordable, attractive, and convenient transport alternatives, and they should be also considered in the short, middle, and long term. Facilitative measures concern mainly population groups which are most vulnerable, but also companies, also businesses, and possibility of subsidies or tax reliefs should be considered for these target groups. Also, the developments of charging infrastructure, of course, should be considered and implemented in parallel. Consultation and communication, so it's important to have all the parties involved, have a stakeholders engagement process along the process, and it will facilitate implementation and ensure acceptability and effectiveness of the measure. If we come back to the roadmap, so the roadmap is basically oriented towards the process of harmonization. So there are different steps, and maybe it could be quicker than what we have put here, although the ambition is to have this harmonization across the Eurodelta. So there are many parties involved at the national level, at local level, regional level, and also transnational. So for the 4 countries involved. So it might take some time, and in addition, there is no institutional framework today already available to discuss this. So it should be via what we propose, a dedicated task force that would assess the feasibility, the political acceptance, also the expectations, for the harmonization process, and on such basis there could be some options in terms of levels of harmonization, levels of ambition also, at all the levels. And then when an agreement is formed among the partners, kind of memorandum of understanding should be signed by all the parties at the national and regional levels where appropriate. And then the implementation could start with, of course, more than a MOU, but then it will be with adequate laws and regulations that are available, that should be available at the national, local, and subnational levels. If we consider the implementation of zero-emission zones at the local level, the harmonization and the implementation of these zones would, of course, reduce air pollution, would provide health benefits, would improve quality of life, and probably reduce costs for citizens, especially if the harmonization is well organized and well foreseen for citizens and also for companies and for freight transport. Both are concerned and both should be beneficial of this measure. We are aware that, as I said, the discussions and the process is long for the harmonization, which is the ultimate target. It would require intensive consultation among many stakeholders, many actors at different levels, and also considering the effect of the subsidiary principle, where, of course, a city could have more specific decisions, more specific choices according to their specificities in terms of economic activities, in terms of tourism, in terms of many factors, many characteristics. Of course, the study is global. We have considered 50 cities, but every city is different, has its own characteristics, own size, own population. So the subsidiarity principle should be also part of the picture, and it is clear that these choices are to be considered as well as the more global and macroscopic approach at the Eurodelta level.